All right. So really quickly, Seth just introduced himself, advocacy manager at Bike Pittsburgh. Eric is our advocacy director at Bike Pittsburgh, and I am communications and marketing manager at Bike Pittsburgh. So we are your hosts here, along with Melissa, who's online. I will introduce her in a moment. After I talk a little bit about what Bike Pittsburgh does, we are transforming our streets to make biking and walking safer. And we've been doing this work since 2002. So it's important to note we're not focused just on biking. We're also focused on biking, walking, rolling, safe streets for all vulnerable road users. Advocacy is the heart of our work. We also do educational resources, maps, guides, classes, and we build community through outreach and events, of course. So in tandem with Bike Pittsburgh, this training is led by Melissa from Pedal Love. So I will kick it to Melissa, our trainer online, to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can read my short little bio here. And I'm not going to read it off to you. Just know that I've been doing this a long time. And and I also want to let you know that we're going to be talking about some very important research. And Pedal Love has been involved in this research for about the past 4 years. So when the research came out at the end of 2019, we found out about it, and it was led by one of our colleagues and friends. And so we wanted to help get the word out. So for the past 4 years, we've hosted a tip sheet, which we are sharing with you today, and many other things. And I'll delve into that in just a minute. But yeah, I've been at this for a while. So thank you. I'm really excited to do this particular kind of training. I've been wanting to do this for a while now, and I'm thrilled that Bike Pittsburgh had the same idea. It's lovely to see some people I know as well, and I look forward to having a fun conversation after the presentation.
All right, so what we'll cover today. This workshop is providing tools and insights into how media coverage shapes public perception of road safety, specifically regarding pedestrians and cyclists on our streets. We're going to focus on a few areas today. Part one, we'll talk about the big picture, why this is important, why it matters, how the media covers crashes, and we'll review some research. Part two, we'll review some relevant local Pittsburgh policies, as well as Allegheny County policies, such as Vision Zero, Complete Streets, Automated Red Light Enforcement. And part three, we'll review some tools and resources that you can take with you, and we'll take some questions and we'll invite conversation. So by the end of the training, you'll have a media toolkit to use in your daily jobs and also share with your colleagues to use. And now it's time to review the survey you all hopefully took before coming today. And for those of you online, Seth is going to link the survey in the chat. And Melissa, I believe, is going to review the results of that survey.
I am, thank you. So before we did this workshop today, we did the survey, and I just wanted to highlight two of the questions that you answered for us because it spells out why we need to be having these kinds of workshops. Again, I talked about the research, which is, does news coverage of traffic crashes affect perceived blame and preferred solutions? These are by researchers at Texas A&M, Rutgers, and Arizona State Universities. And as you can see, we do have a couple of people here that actually know about the research and read it, but most of you either heard about it or you have absolutely no idea what the heck we're talking about and want to know more. So that's a good thing. Ready for the next slide? And this was interesting. This surprised me. I thought more of you would have heard about solutions journalism. This is something that I started to delve into about 5 years ago when I moved up to the Pacific Northwest. And so you can see here that 80% of you have no idea what we're talking about. And so we're looking forward to delving into it. And a couple of you are practitioners of it. So that's fantastic too. Ready to get going. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? Well, in a nutshell, if you don't know it already, traffic crashes are one of the top preventable health epidemics in the country. So death and serious injury from traffic crashes, we know through the practices of Vision Zero are almost completely reversible. And yet here in the United States, we have not created the understanding of it, of the solutions, the receptivity for it, and by and large created the political will. Although we do certainly have bright spots here and there, and of course, Bike PGH can point to those. But we need to do something more, and the media is a great tool that we have underutilized in this. Next slide, please. So I want to touch briefly on many of you know that Sunday was World Day of Remembrance for road traffic victims, and this is part of the reason why we had the workshop right now. I have worked with the Vision Zero Network, Families for Safe Streets, It Could Be Me, and others for the past several years, working on training advocates to become better storytellers. So, excuse me, advocates, city leaders, regional leaders, state leaders, to become better storytellers and better at their strategic media outreach. So, on the left there, you can see that we got into Forbes, and you can see here that our friends over at Mass Bike and Walk Mass in Massachusetts, working with the Vision Zero program for that state, convinced GBH, the big public broadcasting television channel, excuse me, to host a panel. So that they did that just a couple days before World Day of Remembrance. And so as you're thinking about ideas of next steps to move forward, as Julie said, this is a very innovative training. It's the first that we know of its kind, but we can also see that there are ways that we can continue the conversation. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Next slide, please. So why the media matters is that it's all about framing the conversation of traffic crashes. It's all about changing public perception. And by public perception, we mean, by and large, often civic leaders, especially when we're talking about the print news media. Civic leaders are paying attention to that more than the public at large. The public at large tends to pay more attention now to television and social media, but all of them are a wonderful place where we can educate the population about this is a problem we can solve. Next slide, please. So this is a quote from our friends at the Collaborated Science Center for Road Safety in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. You may be familiar with their work. They work mostly with transportation professionals and public health agencies, but they spell out that if we want to fix this, we've got to collaborate and we've got to start rolling our sleeves up and doing more now. I would say, next slide, please, that it's just as important for all of us to know this information, not just the news media. And I do want to put a caveat here because the news media is often writing from police reports. And so, yes, we do know that we have to change how police report on traffic crashes. However, I do want to say that what we found from working with advocates from and cities from around the country is that if they don't already have a fantastic relationship with their police, it's often far easier to get the media to be open-minded to these new ideas. So that's one of the reasons why we really specifically want to talk to the media. And of course, it's the media that's writing the information that's getting to much larger part of the population. Next slide, please. So, one of the things that I want to talk about as we talk about framing here is a little bit of the history of it and why we feel it's time to do something different. And that's because the auto industry did something different in the very beginning. So, this is an article that I share with you in the handout. And almost everything that I cover here is in the toolkit. So, you don't have to take exhaustive notes because it's all there for you. And this is one of the stories that I link to. It's a fantastic one if you haven't read it before. 2015 from Joseph Stromberg. It's the forgotten history of how automakers invented the crime of jaywalking. So back in the 1920s, when autos were new, people were used to mixing it up on the street with many different types of traffic. There were people walking, there were people bicycling, there were people riding horses, there were people driving horses and carriage, there were horses pulling trams, there were electric trams, there were trains, and then along came the car. And when the car would get in crashes or people driving cars would get in crashes with others, the judges would side with the others. And the auto industry saw this as a problem, and they saw it as a big problem. And I think it was maybe Cleveland, Ohio, wanted to regulate speeds of autos at 24 miles an hour, and they pushed back. And they pushed back by starting us off on having regulated rules about where you could cross. And they did a whole gigantic shame campaign coming up with the term jaywalking, using the term for country bumpkin back then, jay, adding it to walking. They did all kinds of shenanigans, public stunts, to get people into this idea that it was only cool to cross the street at crosswalks, at intersections. And then we started having rules of the road, which aren't a bad thing, but I want you to keep that framing in mind as we're asking you to change how we talk about traffic crashes, excuse me. The other thing they did is they had an agency that would help reporters. And when they had crash reporting, people would telegraph their information to this agency. They would rewrite the article that would put the person driving in a much better light and send it back to them. So let's just keep in mind how organized they were then, how organized they are now as we move forward. Next slide, please. So we're going to play a little game here. We're going to have a little Menti slide for you to answer. And I'm going to go through these and I want you to see if, thinking about framing, thinking about what you're learning now, is there a challenge with some of these headlines and some of these stories? So these are, I took just the summer. These are all over the country. You can find headlines like these. Next slide, please. All over the country. These are from this region that I just took 2 days ago. Is there something here that jumps out at you that maybe could be written differently? And then let's do one more. And then we have, I think, or we're going to do show of hands, Seth. Show of hands? Okay, sorry, excuse me. So we're going to do show of hands. Somebody, or you can text the answer. What do you see with these slides? Is there something now that's like not really doing what it could be doing as far as traffic crashes? Anything jumping out at you?
I can't hear from Colin.
I mean, they're like giving the car's human characteristics and agency, as if like the car itself chose to smash through the advanced auto parts.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to keep going because we've got a lot to cover, but these are great things to talk about. Thank you for getting an A. So the research that we're going to cover today is this right here. Again, we've shared this and some of their other research in the toolkit that I share with you. This is by Tara Goddard, our friend, Kelsey Ralph, Calvin Thigpen, and Evan Iacobucci. Next slide, please. And in a nutshell, they found out that yes, the study provides evidence that editorial patterns in traffic crash reporting influences people's interpretation of what happened and what you can do about it. And they focused on 6 key areas of how the media currently, by and large, covers traffic crashes that need to be improved. Now, I do want to say that in many places, there are improvements being made. There are improvements being made right there in Pittsburgh. And shout out to all the journalists that are doing that. But there's still more to be done. So the next slide, please. Okay, so in the toolkit that I give you, there are 3 different charts that spell out exactly what the problems are and what can be done about them. So if you're in the media, this is very helpful. If you're an advocate or anybody else, this is very helpful. Don't think you have to scribble all this down right now because we've provided it for you. But what I am going to do is touch on each one of the points just very briefly so you have some more aha moments. Next slide, please. So the one that most of you have heard of is changing from using the word accident to crash. And the reason why you know about this is that several years ago, Transportation Alternatives out of New York, the advocacy organization for biking, walking, and public transit, was just launching Families for Safe Streets. And they did a fantastic campaign through social media, mostly through Twitter at that time, because at the time it was where you could get in touch with journalists. And they did a campaign to ask the Associated Press, the media platform, and Newswire to change their Bible, their journalist style guide that they come out with every few years, to recommend that crash be used instead of accident. And it worked. They did that. But the research had not come out yet, and we didn't know that, well, yeah, there's more to be done. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to touch on each one of these quickly, but you'll get an example of what I'm talking about, and then we'll dig a little bit more into the final point. So non-agentive versus agentive language. So as you've seen, it obscures the role of human actor. And this is done, you'll see in this a few different ways. So one of the ways that you could see in an article today would be something like a person was hit and killed in a crash. Doesn't even mention that there was a car or a driver. A preferred way to talk about this would be a person was hit and killed by the driver of an SUV. Next slide, please. This is vulnerable road user versus, and most of us here, not most of us, but those of us who are hosting this, of course, are really interested in what's going on with vulnerable road users, because even as traffic crashes go down, the harm to people walking and biking, scooting, skating, etc., goes up. So there's a weird thing in the human brain that whatever the focus of the sentence is, that increases the blame. So currently, what reporters will say is something like, a person in a wheelchair was hit and killed by a truck. This focuses on the victim, not on the car or the driver, and it implies blame. Now, the journalist will say, well, I didn't mean to imply blame, but again, this is human nature. So a preferred way of writing about this is a person driving a truck hit and killed a person in a wheelchair. Next slide, please. This is what we saw in the headlines and that you guys saw clearly, object-based versus person-based, obscuring the role of the human driver. So this is the big one, especially in headlines. An SUV jumped the curb and ran over pedestrians on the sidewalk. An SUV ran into a house, an SUV, or whatever it was. So like as if the auto is sentient and acting all on its own. We do have, of course, cars with no drivers, but that's not by and large who's making the crash happen these days. So it would be better to say a person driving an SUV jumped the curb and ran over pedestrians on the sidewalk. Next slide, please. This is counterfactual statements, and this is tough because this comes often from the police reports. They don't even realize that they're writing things that aren't really facts yet that have been researched. So this increases the perceived blame for the victim, and this happens so often for vulnerable road users. Things are written like the pedestrian darted into traffic, the bicyclist came out of nowhere, the pedestrian was wearing dark clothing, the bicyclist wasn't wearing a helmet, and they really shouldn't have anything to do with the crash. They haven't been sussed out whether they did dart into traffic or not, especially if the police are only asking the driver. And we know the drivers are so much more distracted that somebody could seem to have jumped out of nowhere, but the driver was actually paying attention to their phone, or now more and more, what's on their car's own dashboard. So leave out anything that wasn't proven and stick to the facts is what we're asking. And the final point here is episodic versus thematic framing. And this prevents the public, the audience, from connecting the dots between incidents and the understanding of systemic solutions. So we're going to delve into this a little bit more in just a few minutes, but it fails to provide context for a crash. So let me give you a very simple example. Say a child was hit riding their bike to school. Maybe they were killed, maybe they were harmed, and nothing was mentioned about how often this happens. Nothing was mentioned that Bike Pittsburgh is working to get protected bike lanes put in so children can bike or skate or scoot to school safely. And people just think, well, that's a tragedy, that's horrible, but it's just the cost of business in a fast-paced society. We instead, the research is pointing to that you can share the crash as part of a history of a pattern. This is the sixth incident that we've had on this roadway this year. This is, on and so forth. And this is what helps people understand that there is something that can be done about it. Next slide, please. So what is our call to action as we end this section for you today? Next slide. We're asking you to familiarize yourself with all 6 areas of the coverage that needs improving. So we are giving you the research. We are giving you handouts. We're giving you tip sheets. For the media, we are asking you to please bring this research to your leadership team and make a bold statement. Ask them to create a style guide for your outlet. For those of you who are advocates, you need to know about this research because you need to be pitching to your local, regional, statewide, and may I say national media to get them to improve the coverage. And for civic leaders, we need to ask you to create the funding to train staff and law enforcement so they can be part of the solution as well, so they can improve their own traffic crash reporting. Next slide, please. The big thing we want you to do, of course, is reach out to BikePGH and myself and ask us how we can help you make a training, make resources, keep the conversation going. So we want to make sure that everybody has this information, and we'll follow up with any questions that they have after this presentation. So we're going to have another Menti poll. We're going to have a first Menti poll here. What are your biggest barriers to putting something like this into play?
And we're actually going to start with this one just to test out Menti, since we're going to have a couple of slides. So we meant to do this earlier, and this was my fault. I forgot to do it, just to kind of see who's in the room. So before we get to barriers, you can either scan the QR code that's up there.
Oh, right. Yeah, yes.
You can go to menti.com and use that code, or I'm dropping a unique link in the chat that will also work and take you there. There it is. So go ahead and get oriented. It's kind of cool to see who's in our physical and virtual room here. We're getting that to
That's
work.
very cool. I love seeing this.
You can also go to menti.com and plug in that code if it's not working. This is our chance to troubleshoot here really quick. Is it working for you, Ed?
No, but that means being old.
You can go to menti.com as well and plug in that code. So we're starting to get situated. We see we have a lot of government and civic leaders in the room. We definitely got some advocates. I know we have two journalists in the room over here. Ed is joining us right now, but we have a lot of people who are responsible in our roles for communicating when traffic crashes happen. And so it's really cool, I think, that we have this blend of folks in the room coming at it from a couple of different angles and different perspectives. So we're going to go on to the next one here, our next activity. And this is to the question that Melissa posed, which is, and I'm going to just drop the QR code now. What are your biggest barriers to implementing these recommendations that Melissa put forward? And Melissa, since we're not looking at it anymore, would you actually just read to us what those recommendations were, just so we have them top of mind?
Yes. So the recommendations are, if you're a journalist, we're asking you to be big. We're asking you not to just change how you yourself report, but we're asking you to bring this research to your leadership team and see if a style guide can be created for your whole outlet. If you are an advocate, we're asking you to learn all of this, and we're asking especially this falls on the communications person and the executive director, let's say, to be reaching out to the media, especially when you see egregious challenges with reporting, and saying, hey, can we have a conversation about this, and bringing them the research in a kind, friendly way that's going to be bridge building and allow them to be open-minded to the changes. And then for your civic leaders, I'm so glad there's so many of you here. Please learn about the research. Please learn about how to talk about traffic crashes in your own communications, because you're doing a lot of communicating with the public. And find the funds and the spaces to get your police trained. That could be a next step here for Pittsburgh. And be a champion to become a stellar city, location, area, region that is doing excellent traffic crash coverage. So great. I love these answers. Thank you. Exactly. Funding for training law enforcement. There you go.
If there are any that you want to hear more about, Melissa, feel free to shout them out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lack of staff for more coverage. I hear you. Absolutely.
You can submit more than once.
It's dependent on the information available. Exactly. Sometimes these stories will have to be part of a series. But there's ways to do this, because we're seeing journalists do it. And I did share with you, I don't think we mentioned to everybody, Seth, that we have a Google Drive folder with a lot of resources. And we're going to share that in a follow-up email, and we'll send the link out as well. And in there is a journalist from Sacramento, California, for the Sacramento Bee. So that's the state capital. And she took it upon herself. She said, we're not doing vigorous journalism on traffic crashes. And this was before she even knew about the research. Um, Non-standardized reporting, biases in reporting. Excellent. These are fantastic results. These are fantastic results. I think to keep on time, we need to keep going though. Are we good with that? Thank you, everybody. That's fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to go into my favorite part of the presentation because I love the power of storytelling. And so I'm asking all of us, doesn't matter whether you're just in the media, are you humanizing the stories of the tragedy of traffic crashes with personal stories? And I've shared this because this is a young, beloved, very talented young doctor in Philadelphia who was killed this summer while she was riding her bike in a bike lane by a drunk driver. And the media there, I have to say, the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia has done a very good job, especially with the Philadelphia Inquirer, of getting them to change their.
Here's that Melissa has frozen. So we'll let her catch up here for a moment. While we are waiting for Melissa, and she can kind of jump back in at the top here. Oh, she's back. Take it away, Melissa.
Must be
okay. Let's just kind of while we're waiting for Melissa to come back, and we'll cut you off when she does come back. I'm curious to hear from the group. What are you getting out of this so far? Either here in this room or up on Zoom. You can raise your hand. What's standing out to you? What's interesting? Maybe what are you learning already? Just love to hear some reflections from folks.
I'll say incorporating this into our style guide is going to be easy.
Yeah.
I mean, we just did a revision of our style guide, and there's plenty of leeway for us to add stuff like this. So
awesome.
That's a simple change.
I'm curious. Here's Melissa. She's back. That's fantastic. I mean, it's really good to hear that like your style guide is recently updated, and even though it's recently updated, you could go back in and add this.
It's definitely a living document for us. I mean, I think particularly like in 2020, there was a lot of kind of accommodating for social change. We've had to update it to consider more gender identities. So this is just kind of a piece of evolving with the times.
Fantastic. We just had a quick chat of what people are learning so far, Melissa. So you can jump back in and
Yay! Maybe it froze because I got emotional. So anyways, but my point is that this is a story from Philadelphia, and yet you can see here that this was the New York Post that carried the story. And so this is really the heart of the matter, that storytelling, emotionally engaging stories about people really cuts through. And so let's talk now. Those of you in the media actually know this already, but let's go through this a little bit more and be reminded of this. So storytelling will save the earth. This is from Wired. I don't know if that's true, but I hope it saves humanity. Let's just share a quote from that because it really is the heart of the matter. The next slide, please. So unlike numbers or facts, stories can trigger an emotional response, harnessing the power of motivation, imagination, and personal values, which drive the most powerful and permanent forms of social change. So for advocates, this can be really hard to hear, but the thing is that data doesn't do it. Stories are the superpower to motivate people to action. So let's walk out just a tiny bit and learn why. The next slide, please. So personally engaging stories done well, can change brain chemistry, they can breed compassion, and they can motivate people to action. It's really all about science. Next slide, please. Let's geek out just a little bit more. 3 of the reasons are cortisol, oxytocin, and dopamine. So cortisol is a stress hormone like adrenaline, and both of them, when your brain engages with a story, they super focus your attention span. Oxytocin is the feel-good hormone or the empathy hormone, which is why our heart bleeds and breaks for somebody it's not a story about a group of people, it's about one talented doctor whose loss is really being felt in Philadelphia. And then dopamine is really fascinating. It's the neurotransmitter that gives you the sense of accomplishment for being engaged in a story. Now, this is the reason why you can binge watch your favorite TV show all weekend. You can stay up all night reading that thriller. It's also why we're all addicted to our phones, because we're addicted to storytelling and the dopamine hits it gives us. And this is their big superpower over data as well. Our brains are wired for stories, so we remember stories better than data. So data is important, but you've got to wrap your data in storytelling, and this is just as important for civic leaders and for advocates as it is for the media if you want people to be motivated to change. Next slide, please. So what do we want journalists to do? We want you to include more stories of the actual human beings that are the victims and survivors of traffic crashes. It's also really important, I want to call out here that the survivors' lives are often completely transformed and their families' lives are completely transformed um, in really terrible ways, and they get forgotten. So we want to make sure that those that have been really hurt also get mentioned. We want to ask you also to become trauma informed. So there is a new wave of doing journalism about trauma. And I've shared a quote here that trauma informed journalism means understanding trauma, understanding what trauma survivor is experiencing before you show up at their door, and understanding how your actions and as a journalist will impact them after you leave. And this is actually for all of us, especially in advocacy, who are working with those who have been in traffic crashes or have lost loved members, family members, excuse me. Next slide, please. So if you're an advocate or a civic leader, how can you help the media humanize the issue of traffic violence? You can become a bridge between your constituents that are victims or survivors if you're a civic leader. And as advocates, many of us are working with people that have been harmed. And so we might not even have an official Families for Safe Streets chapter, but we're still working with people in our neighborhoods that have been impacted by this. And we can say the news media can learn that we are who you need to call if you want to actually speak to somebody. You can work with victims and survivors of traffic violence to prepare them best to tell their story in a way that honors their loss, but minimizes traumatization, and that makes the advocacy goals clear. So we also want to say, please don't tell people's stories without permission, because that can be re-traumatizing for people as well. Next slide, please. So over the past 5 years or so, I've done a lot of trainings with members from Families for Safe Streets throughout the country. And I myself, for different reasons, have dealt with trauma. And it made me really think that I wanted to come up with a way to help people that are dealing with trauma survivors and victims not get frustrated, because it can be very challenging and people can be flaky, they can be extremely emotional, they can be very angry, they can derail feedback sessions if they haven't been prepped properly, that the advocates were hoping would go one way and you were going to get that city council thing passed with flying colors, and all of a sudden you're back in the weeds. So for all of us, it's and this is if you're somebody who's survived trauma as well. Share your story first in an informed, supportive community of like-minded people, hopefully with trauma-informed people. Stay in that place as long as you need to, because when you become a advocate storyteller, you want to use your story for strategic purposes, for specific advocacy goals. And that's a switch that needs to be flipped inside of you. Nobody can do it for you. However, you might find that it's best that the communications director or the executive director tells your story in many cases for you, so that you minimize the harm and that those important advocacy goals get left in. And finally, when people are really good at being advocate storytellers, those stories are quick, short, powerful, and nimble for every different occasion, because we all know this. When it's not our situation that we're dealing with, we know it, but when it's our situation, we forget. Human beings are selfish. We've got a lot that we're thinking about. And whenever you want to change people's minds, you've got to meet them where they are, and they've got to see what's in it for them. So when you want to open hearts and change minds, you got to meet them in the middle somewhere and create a bridge. Next slide, please. So what could be a next step action? And I think I need my slide to go over these really quickly first.
All right.
That's okay. That's okay. This is exciting. So Our call to action on this is that we want to ask you to be trauma informed. And again, in the toolkit, I give you some fantastic resources for journalists. For all of us, these are for journalists, but to become trauma informed. For advocates, become trauma informed and don't tell people stories without permission, and also let them tell their stories when they can and create spaces for them to learn how to become advocate storytellers. This is what Petalev has been specializing in of late. And then for civic leaders, this is really crucial. If you can find places for victims and survivors to get trained, if you can find the support, if you can find the locations, the funding, the resources, that will really help your community. And it's not just for traffic violence. So if you learn this kind of storytelling training, it works for gun violence. It works for different kinds of things as well. So that's what our call to action is. Go ahead, Seth. Sorry.
Now we're going to take a look at another Menti here, and it's a little bit of a different structure. This time we are asking you to consider what are actions you're willing to commit to related to this last section that Melissa talked about. And we have 5 different buckets here that you can say, yeah, I think I can do that. You can select more than one, which is learn about trauma-informed journalism. What does that mean? How do you integrate that into your work? To tell stories of the person who was harmed or killed whenever possible. So making a commitment to say, yes, I'm going to do that in my outreach, my publication. To ask permission to tell the story of a victim. I hope that one would be easy for everybody to say yes to. Offer support for victims to tell their stories. And this is that element of maybe investing in some workshops and going above and beyond saying, hey, I'm here to support you, but to really offer some structures, offer some resources, offer some training perhaps to help victims tell their stories, not just after it happened, but going forward for a while afterwards to become advocates in their own way. And if there's something else, we'd love to hear what it is, but we'll give people a moment to give their input here. I'm glad to see a lot of people are willing to ask permission. Consent is really important. I really do hope everybody's on board with that.
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that you guys are taking that to heart because, you know, I have to be honest with you. When we first started doing this work, when we were, my colleague Jim and I were told that, we were like, uh-oh, that didn't, that hadn't occurred to us. And we can see that it really is a powerful first gesture. Thank you, everybody.
Who were the 2 people who said something else? We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I just want to hear just the bottom lines. What is your something else commitment? Ed?
To encourage the folks like Pittsburgh, who is really cooperative, but to tell us those stories. We don't know things unless somebody tells us in lots of cases.
Excellent.
And we need to be open to hearing those things. Some of them will jump on, some of them maybe we won't. Some of them may be more difficult to handle than others, but
so
there's willing to listen.
Here's a call to action from one of our journalists in the room, Ed Blazina from the Pittsburgh Union Progress, calling on us advocates and civic leaders to prepare those stories, to bring those stories to you so you know what they are and you can use them effectively, right?
So here's a thought for to put a dot on that is that on the media room, on the newsroom, having a section that says we can connect you with those who've dealt with these kinds of tragedies, and that way the media knows exactly where they need to go because you know you're looking for a story and you're doing research at 3 o'clock in the morning. That would be really helpful. Thank you. This is fantastic. I love seeing this.
Can we hear one more something else, Melissa?
Absolutely.
One more in this room? Was there another something else on Zoom? If it was you and you're willing to share, just come off mute and tell us what your something else is.
I was something else just for style guide changes.
Okay, great. Style guide changes. Was there one more online as a something else? Okay, great. All is well. If you want to put it in the chat. Peter did put something in the chat. He just noted that they do ghost bikes in South Bend. On asking permission from the family to honor their family member is really important. Also asking permission where we put up the bike so they're not re-traumatizing those family members by putting it else.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you for that, Peter.
I'm going to take us back to the slides here. Thanks for engaging with us, folks. Okay.
Okay, so the final part of this, which was the part that people knew the least about, but is really powerful, and that is the idea of solutions journalism. And this is not just for the media people that are here. This is for all of us because we can be solutions storyteller. So this is from the Solutions Journalism Network, which is the leading a global shift in journalism focused on advancing rigorous reporting about how people are trying to solve problems and what we can learn from their successes and failures. And that's Eric is going to be going into that more in just a few minutes, but that's what we're all about. We want to change what's going on with crashes by creating known valuable solutions that have been tested and proven. Next slide, please. So I just want to tell you briefly, all of this information that I'm sharing with you today is from the Solutions Journalism Network. They are in the toolkit.
We appear to have lost Melissa again. While we're waiting for her to hop back on, what do people know about solutions journalism already? If there's something that you know about it, even garnering from this slide here. Anybody can raise their hand.
Well, it seems it was founded in 2013 by
I'll say it was new to me when we started even working on this.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What are oh, Sam, go ahead. Oh, we're gonna cut you off. Melissa's
Oh, no,
back.
no, Sam, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to comment that one of the things that it seems notable for is the way that you are also, in addition to promoting solutions or reporting on solutions, it's always important to provide people with a narrative that can replace the negative assumption that might be habitually in place. So even if we change the way we say the sentence and we say, we're making the agent right, we're putting the focus in the right place, we know that we have a cultural habit of blaming the victim. And so I like the idea of solutions journalism as also inserting the narrative that you want, right? More assertively.
I think you said that better than I did. Thank you. And that is exactly why I've shared that when I started to teach this, I did homework to find the Solutions Journalism Network for all the reasons that you said so beautifully. Thank you. So they do have a website with all kinds of resources, and we want you to check them out. But let's go over some of the key points about it, because this is going to really be interested. So they did research on this. They didn't just come up, with these ideas and say, we believe this because we're, award-winning journalists. And this is Seth Geiger, who did some of the research and said, once you're exposed to this, you've unleashed a new set of expectations about how much better local news can be. And they want to persuade every newsroom in America that at least one story a day should have significant solutions component to it. Let's see what his research told people or tells us. That's the next slide, please. The solutions journalism stories have more appeal, more audience appeal. They have better ratings. And this is most of this was for television. It wasn't even for print or online. And they had greater impact. So who doesn't want to have that, whether you are a journalist or whether you are the social media manager of a city staff or of an advocacy organization? So solutions journalism stories change people's understanding. That's exactly what Sam was just talking about, right? And that's what we want to reframe the conversation about traffic crashes. Next slide, please. So, as I said, advocates and civic leaders, you are not off the hook. We can become solution storytellers because the most powerful advocates, and you can be an embedded advocate inside your city government, they don't just ask the city, the state, the county, whatever, to do something. They bring the known solutions because then the city has something to respond to instead of just their big long list of everybody asking for problems to be fixed. Next slide, please. So remember I said that we were going to go back to some of the research, and this is the sixth point, episodic versus thematic framing. This is where solutions journalism really comes into play. So this is about providing context about the history and how things can be improved. Next slide, please. Now, I didn't want to just say this can happen and be pie in the sky. I wanted to use an example for those of us who work with cities, and that is an example of a very specific solutions journalism outlet is Next City. Now, it's not on their website anywhere that you can easily quickly find, but when I started to dig into this, I put two and two together. I wrote to their executive director and said, "Are you using solutions journalism?" And he said, "We were founded on the tenets of solutions journalism. We use it all the time." Thank you very much for asking. He was thrilled. I got an answer like that. It was thrilling. Next, and if you don't know Next City yet, please look them up. So solutions journalism has four key ingredients to it. Solution stories can be character driven, but they focus in depth on a way to respond to a problem and how the response works in a meaningful way. They focus on effectiveness, not good intentions, and they present evidence. They discuss the limits of the approach, and they seek to provide insights that others can use. And this is really important because those of us who are working to prevent traffic deaths and serious injuries are trying to transform our cities, and we need to be learning from, and our rural communities, we need to be learning from each other. You know, what worked in Amsterdam, what worked in Denmark might not work in Indiana, but Rhode Island might have figured it out. And so we are a network learning from each other, and we want to tell solution stories. Next slide, please. So solutions journalism uses the acronym WHOLE, WHOLE, to help journalists and solution storytellers to remember what the heck this entails. So W is what response does it address? H is how does it work? How is it done? O is what insights does it offer? L is what are the limitations? And E is what is the evidence? And again, this is all in the toolkit, but you can see that it gives you a fantastic framework whether you are talking as an advocate about a network of protected bike lanes or new type of intersection, writing a grant proposal, whatever it is, it shows you how you can shape your communications so that it's helpful not only to your team, but others. Next slide, please. So our call to action in this, as I wrap up my portion of it, is, next slide, please. So we want you to familiarize yourself with the tenets of solutions journalism. It's in the toolkit. I've shared the link of their website. They've got a lot of fantastic resources there. And you can, if you're in the media, you can sign up for classes. So if you're in the media, we would like you to consider becoming an officially trained solutions journalism network outlet, or at least one of the member of your staff. For advocates, we want you to use their online tools and get your team to become solution storytellers and train your constituents to become solution storytellers, which can be done on your website, social media, and your news media pitches. So if your news media isn't doing it yet, you can, especially like the news media is doing it often in certain areas, but if they're not doing it around traffic coverage, traffic crashes, you can show them how it's done. And for civic leaders, please support the state, regional, local agencies to become solutions journalism, then the media outlets become solutions journalism outlets, and for yourselves and for your local advocates and your constituents to become powerful solutions storytellers. And what do we have next here? So we're gonna have some reflection time now. We're gonna have a little bit of a comments if people want to say anything about this before we switch gears and have Eric share with us some specifics about the Pittsburgh region.
Just a minute or two as Eric's transitioning here. Are there any takeaways, questions for Melissa briefly, or general comments about what you're getting out of this so far? Yeah, Ed.
I think all of these things are good, and I'll do something you don't normally do is I'll speak on behalf of journalists. We all want good stories. We all want important stories. A couple of things are in the way there that make it more difficult. Newsrooms, maybe not television as much, but newsrooms are shrinking. Where I normally work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, we had 220 people 10 years ago. Now we barely have 100. So there are less people to do the stories. And it's hard to gauge what the public wants. What I mean is, on the one hand, we want to write everything we can as quickly as possible and get it posted online so everybody can see it. And you can't do a good job doing that. And if you concentrate on that, then you're not concentrating on a story that takes 4 days to find out enough information about why something happened. So it's a balancing act that the media probably, I'll speak for newspapers here, probably isn't handling as well as it could, but that's part of the reality there.
Yeah. And I think it's, I imagine that resonates with
yeah.
you, Colin,
Yeah.
not to put you on the spot. But I appreciate hearing, Ed, that there's this layer of just like so much going on, and to be able to report the way that you might want to on these crashes can be challenging when there's so much to keep track of, which I think, to your point earlier, makes it that much more important for civic leaders and for advocates to really be on our game in terms of reaching out and being as supportive as possible when something happens. And it's a good reason to cultivate relationships with reporters so that we know we can chat with each other when something happens and be able to say, hey, you might want to think about framing it this way. It's why I think having you two in the room now is really, really strong.
Or if there's something you might not know about this situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And it is hard because advocates can say, well, we're not rolling in dough and resources either. But it's so important that the advocates really can become trained in this. And one of the reasons why I do so many of these trainings and have people talk about media strategy is that I have been at this for a long time, and I've seen new communications people. In fact, Julie and I bonded over this, that I've seen waves of new communications people come in, and they aren't necessarily trained in how to deal with the media because they might be social media people now rather than pitch. They don't even know how to pitch to the media, or even that pitching to the media is possible. And so, to your point, that the sad state of what's going on in the news media is a whole other conversation that's needed. But you can become sources now in ways that you might not have been able to. And so you have to do your homework when it is your advocacy world, because it's so important to get the information out there. And this is where we need to like lead people into where they didn't know they needed to know this. And I'll give you an example. You know, I'd been in this for years, and my mother, when she was still with us, would kind of, you know, her eyes, I get on a soapbox and her eyes would glaze over until, and this was when I was living in Long Beach. I said, you know, it's the #1 cause of death for children under the age of 15 in the state of California. Now, this was several years ago, maybe 9 years ago, but my mother stopped what she was doing and said, what? So she had 3 grandchildren, and all of a sudden, now that's not just outside of cars, but inside cars too. So it is, you know, and those of us in biking and walking transit advocacy are learning that we've got to make bridges with those of us that are in different kinds of safe street advocacy, because as these cars get bigger and more dangerous, the people that are in slightly smaller cars are really seeing terrible things happen. So thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. I think it's an ongoing conversation you need to be having.
And a great transition over to Eric, because he's going to share some things that are useful for all of us to know about the weeds just a little bit.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. So I'm Eric. I'm the advocacy director of Bike Pittsburgh. I'm going to go over try to bring this a bit to the local perspective. And I'm going to be really brief because I think the conversation is really important. So I want to make sure so we have time to get back to that. But there's a few things that are happening, you know, in our sphere that, you know, we want to make sure that people know about, especially the journalists who are looking for stories and looking for ways to bring a local perspective to what's going on. First of all, I just wanted to mention that if you can, I'm up here so people on the screens can see me, but you can also see the slides. So there's four topics. First of all, the PA vehicle code. There's a couple of things going on with that. I believe you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so there's one, some of you have covered this in the past, the parking protected bike lanes. It's not on the slide because we just found out it just failed again for the 5th year in a row. It did not make it through Senate, or it made it through Senate, it just did not make it all the way through. It got yet again embroiled into politics, Republicans versus Democrats. Like it failed when it was a Republican bill. It failed when it was a Democrat bill. It passed the House unanimously 4 or 5 times now, but it just cannot get through Senate without getting stuck in politics. And, you know, we've had local leaders here support the bill. In short, it's a technical fix to the vehicle code that would allow for parking protected bike lanes. The current vehicle code says that cars must be parked 12 inches from a curb, and PennDOT is very strict about how they define a curb as a curb, or not. It is not a line in the pavement or a painted line. And so right now it's illegal for state roads and for state funding to build parking protected bike lanes with just a painted line, like every other city in the country does. So anyway, we've been fighting with Greater Philly Bike Coalition to change the vehicle code, and it failed one more time. And we're going to keep going with it, but we're hoping to get through. Go. Forgive me for interrupting. Yeah, that's the first I've ever heard of that. I've okay. Transportation for 10 years. I've never heard of it. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if it was before the strike or not. The PG actually did endorse the bill, wrote an editorial, I believe, 2 years ago about it, which was cool. Okay. But yeah, I'm happy to talk more about it because it did just fail last week. And then another thing that's coming up is there's a man in Butler County who was riding his bike and was pulled over and given a ticket for riding in the street. And he fought this $25 parking ticket or $25 moving ticket all the way to the PA Supreme Court. PA Supreme Court heard it in October 6th, I believe. They heard arguments from both sides. In short, if he loses, then it gives police the opportunity to dictate where a bicyclist can ride. So where it really brings it local is the police can basically give you a ticket for riding in the street. If he wins, then that goes back to what we think is the intention of the vehicle code, giving the bicyclist the choice on where on the street they can ride. We should be expecting to see the Supreme Court's ruling on that. We don't know exactly when. Anywhere between January and May is when we expect to see that ruling. But it's a pretty big deal coming up, and it can affect bicycling across the whole state. And it really hasn't gotten that much, really barely any coverage, to be quite honest.
I did not like what I saw from the justices on that either. There was some like weird skepticism about the idea of something that's been taking place for like 140 years. Yeah. And as a bicycle commuter, I was just like, oh boy.
Yeah.
It opens up quite a box if they actually
it definitely could
against him. Yeah.
So we don't know where it's going to go. We do have a blog on our website which explains it. Next slide. Another big thing that's coming up is the US DOT. Is changing. For the past 4 years, the Biden administration has been really good about traffic projects through a safe systems approach, which is sort of like Vision Zero, but it puts safety front and center. So a lot of their decisions, a lot of their funding are all based off of safety. That may go away. We don't know what the next administration is how they're going to approach their funding. We can all assume that they're going to take a different approach. It may not be through the lens of safety. It may be through the lens of congestion mitigation, for instance. So we just don't know where it's going to go, but it's going to have local effects. The city of Pittsburgh and region have gotten money through the safe systems approach. I think it helped lead to the city adopting a Vision Zero policy, which helped, sort of increase their chances of getting funding. But that's one thing that's going to change and it's going to have local effects. Next slide. Pittsburgh's commitment to Vision Zero. I'm glad to see some city folks here who helped literally make it happen. What that is the city, earlier this year, Mayor Gainey committed to 0 traffic fatalities and serious injuries in the city of Pittsburgh. It's a really incredible and sweeping policy change at the local level. Like I said, it's backed by the federal DOT. And I just want to mention also Councilwoman Warwick was a big part in making that happen as well. But basically there's a lot of background things that we've seen change, but I feel like could get a lot more press and could get a lot more coverage. The city's really been, it's been at least from our perspective, it's been a pretty big mind shift in how they approach these things. First of all, They now, it goes across multiple departments instead of it being all the responsibility of DOMI. Multiple departments are coming together to figure out how to achieve zero traffic fatalities. They have, if there's a fatality, they have a quick response team where they show up and they at the scene and they talk through the quick changes they can do, the medium-term changes and the long-term changes they can do. They're focusing their efforts and priorities on a high injury network to help reduce fatalities. That's a new thing. And, you know, it just really builds upon a strong foundation of other existing established plans and policies that are there. But it really, one thing I want to stress is it's achievable in Pittsburgh. We see roughly 20 to 25 fatalities per year. About a third of those are pedestrians and bicyclists. But we do think that to the point made earlier, that traffic fatalities are preventable and we can do things to make that happen. And I'm really excited to see Mayor Gainey's administration, you know, work at this through that lens. Next slide. And one way to achieve Vision Zero, this goes back to the previous administration of Mayor Peduto, was a complete streets policy. A complete streets policy is sort of a way to frame how we build our streets to make sure that when we build our streets, these streets are available and able to be used by all users of the roadways of all ages and abilities. So the complete streets policy gets triggered when there's, say, a new street put in or a developer built a street. And it basically, they have to, it flips the script of them just putting in the street and then advocates being like, hey, what about us? What about bicyclists? What about pedestrians? It makes them approach the street design from the opposite angle where they're supposed to go into it with thinking through where a bicyclist is going to go, where a pedestrian is going to go, so that we don't have to go through and ask for those changes. That makes sense. So that's been in play. 2016 is when Mayor Peduto passed that policy. And we've already seen the benefits of that, you know, so many times throughout Pittsburgh as we're building our streets. It's led to a complete streets advisory group, which is still meeting, which is meeting again, I should say. It went away in the pandemic. Mayor Gainey brought it back, you know, which is a really active group of residents and advocates, civic leaders, nonprofit organizations that get together quarterly to talk through how the city is doing, so to speak, with their complete streets approach and if they're effective or not. And
can I do just a quick add-on here? I think when we're talking about the idea of solutions journalism, right? I think it was that whole acronym that Melissa shared earlier. I'm not going to remember all of what it was, but to me, complete streets is the solution. Like Vision Zero is kind of the why almost, and it's obviously the governmental structure and systems that are making sure that we get to this goal of zero traffic fatalities. But at the end of the day, we know that infrastructure changes are what are going to slow vehicles down or slow drivers down and protect lives, right? So complete streets is the way that we do that, and we most want to see have that done. So when you're thinking about, okay, what is the solution when there's a crash? Complete streets should be the first thing that comes to your mind, and figure out how to tell a story that illustrates the need for that complete street so that it's a street that really works for everybody.
Thanks. Yeah, so we've spent a lot of time and energy working and to push these policies through over the past several years. And, you know, it sort of makes it a more holistic approach. I'm not going to get into all the other things. There's lots of plans and things like that all feed into it. But one thing I will say is, especially with the adoption of Vision Zero, that Vision Zero policy sort of brought all of that together under one big tent. So that now, and I see this happen with city employees, as they're making their decisions because of the Vision Zero policy, they're looking to make sure they look to this plan. They look at the neighborhood plan over here. They look at the bike plan. They look at the pedestrian action plan to see when they're making decisions if there's any ways that they can incorporate those plans into their decision making. So just wanted to put that out there. Just some things that we feel, you know, could always use more coverage, and we're here to help and here to help, you know, you know, build stories as we move forward. Thanks.
So one of the things I want to say is I hear all of this about you because I do work with people not only on the local level, but on the national and statewide level, is that this these are really big things that you're working on that could be summed up in a statewide release, like moving forward. So we just did something from the Vision Zero Network and Families for Safe Streets. It could be me, Daniel Langenkamp in DC, who is a public relations person himself, who his wife was killed right when they came back from the war in Europe. She was killed. She was a U.S. diplomat, and she was killed riding her bike a couple of weeks after coming home from Kosovo. And it's been wonderful to have him to strategize with on things. And so for the first time, you guys might have seen in Streets Blog USA that there was a call to action for the new um, administration of how to make safe streets. And so as you're sharing these different things that have been frustrating, is working with Philadelphia to come up with a call to action. And the reporter saying this is the first, and others saying this is the first time I've ever heard of this, is like recognizing that you've got to be really proactive in your media pitching and your media outreach to get the information out there. We've created a new press list for you guys, and making sure that the Associated Press that covers Philadelphia, covers state reporters, covers the region, is getting that information, and then a broad array of journalists than you might have normally thought would be interested in this is getting the information, because the media does not always have time to go looking for stories. They're going through their pitch box because they don't have time. They are so cut down. And so not only do you need to come up with the solutions journalism, but you need to be pitching the stories to them because they might want to know, they might want to do a story, but they've never heard of it. So that's something, and this is not just for the advocates. This is also, we have cities that are starting to collaborate to do this kind of pitching on the stories because they want support for the work that they want to get done. Discuss.
You ready to share our resources, Lori?
Sure. Yeah. Let's go to part 3 and do some. We're just gonna talk about things that are in the toolkit. So, do we have a slide that's after this, or is this just? Oh, here we are. We put together a Google Drive folder for you to access all the resources for this training. So we'll send out a follow-up email. We're also going to write a recap blog, so it'll live on our blog, but we'll also send it out in our email. And if you really can't wait, you can scan here now and see those resources in that toolkit. And yeah, I think we also now have time to, if there's anything else we want to discuss, if there's anybody in the chat that might have some questions or things to add, we can review that now. But we don't want to hold anyone here hostage either. So if you feel that you would like to leave, that's okay too. But yeah.
Yeah, excited to hear what questions do folks have for Melissa, for us at Bike Pittsburgh, for each other, perhaps, since we have such a diversity of people in the room, from civic leaders to advocates to journalists. We can have that conversation be popping. What do folks got? Ed, yeah.
Not to make this a political discussion, but how much different will your job be with a different administration? The reason I ask that is, I know when Mr. Trump was president before, I was probably at one news conference that the U.S. Department of Transportation had. And I had to beg to even find out that information. Now, I'm getting stuff from them every day, telling me what they're doing, making sure I'm on the list for being invited to streamline stuff that they're doing, etc. Do the advocates face the same type of problem?
Yeah, I mean, we just had a conversation in a workshop with our national advocates recently, discussing this very topic, and we actually had this discussion before we even knew who the new proposed transportation secretary is going to be. You know, the guy from Road Rules. He knows the rules of the road, right? So he sorry. One thing that, like, the one silver lining that we know right now is that the Biden administration did pass a transportation bill, which is hugely important and bringing tons of money to our region and tons of projects that are happening. You know, and likely the next administration is going to take credit for a lot of that stuff that's in the Biden bill. But that bill does go through 2026, and they probably won't create a new bill afterwards. They're probably going to reauthorize that bill. Now, how they deal with all the rules and funding mechanisms, they're probably going to be cutting a lot of the carbon things, like anything that has to do with climate change. We could see that stuff being cut. But a lot of people right now are worried that if there's a project that they even got awarded, if they don't get it under contract, that it can be sucked back to the federal DOT. And that's one of the things that people are kind of stressing about, and advocates are trying to push, our civic leaders to make sure move these projects as far forward as possible, because even I'm guessing the Trump administration doesn't want to pull money that's like already on route, already has jobs associated to it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing that we're thinking about, but we're all learning right now as things come about. We're not expecting the same kind of support from the federal government. We'll say that.
One thing that I became
something that I wanted to go circle back to a little bit, which was very exciting for me, is that it's not exciting for me that you didn't pass the protected or the parking separated bike lanes, and you've tried so many times, but it was exciting to me that this is bipartisan, that it's come from different sides. And so what I would be doing right now as an advocate that live in purple states or states that are very mixed is asking for people across the aisle politically that were the proponents of that to help. How do we speak about this situation now in language that a different type of constituency will be interested in hearing? So it might be around traffic mitigation, moving traffic better. We know that everything that we want to do to calm streets and save lives also moves traffic better for people driving. But if that story isn't told, the direct opposite is what people assume. And so right now, when we did the media outreach for World Day of Remembrance, frankly, we were thrilled that we got any media placement because of all the reporters nationally were being pulled off for politics. So we were thrilled, but we spoon-fed that story to Forbes. Like, that was mostly our press release, to be honest with you. And so that's what I would, advocates on the state and national level. And frankly, you guys are friends here. I would be asking those of you in the media that are willing to be open-minded about, how would you talk about this stuff? Like, if you care about traffic crashes and having safer streets, off the record, give us some notes about what, the way that you speak about stuff. Because again, we go back to the framing, right? We go back to how is this framed? And everybody cares whether or not their loved ones get killed or get maimed for the rest of their life. Everybody cares about that. And so sometimes it's just the way the story is presented. But that's what I'm thinking about right now. I'm thinking about learning new ways to frame language.
Colin, you had something to chime in on?
Yeah, I just two data points that I learned just very recently that really stuck with me is, one is that a very disproportionate number of accidents takes place on state-owned roadways. So, and in looking at crashes in Pittsburgh, there's a ton of data, but it's not very useful. A lot of it is, vehicles are classified according to how they're most convenient for police. There's not a lot of information about the nature of injuries, like that kind of thing. And then another fact that I learned recently is that there's apparently now 6 PR people for every media person, for every actual journalist. So there's a lot of, like, for lack of a better term, just like propaganda and tainted data and bias in a lot of what's being fed to reporters. So I will just say, like, from my perspective as a journalist, one of the things that's really lacking right now is more kind of statewide or larger, like, just basically larger fields of data that we can create a narrative from. Because as Melissa mentioned, and as we discussed, like, the stories make it, but the data is also kind of how you verify what you're doing. And that's, like, in my conversation with Eric for my Vision Zero article too, like, it's hard to draw patterns from just city of Pittsburgh, but it's easier on a state level, and there's just not really a way for us to access that. And so I guess I'm putting this out there more as a plea, which is just
no, I think this is something,
like data visualization from PA.
No, I think that this is something that this is a very big topic of conversation, because this is happening all over the place. I'm a native of Long Beach, California, and we have a street that's very famous called PCH. and it is a death trap. And advocates have been working for years trying to get the speed slowed there, and it's a state-owned highway. So it's one of these. It's a situation that's going on. So this is sort of a conversation that needs to be had with League of American Bicyclists and others. To your point, people for bikes too, because they're so phenomenal with their data and their graphics that like, how is it being done? Is it transferring ownership? The places that transferred ownership back to the cities, then how did the city afford to make the safety? You're talking about a lot of moving parts there, but it's a big story that needs to find coverage, and this is where advocates could play ball with each other and get you what you need, maybe by making it statewide or even a national, so that they could bring it back to you and say, here you go. This is, you asked us for this, and here's the information. Because the information's out there, but you're right, it needs to be gathered.
And it wasn't until recently that PennDOT even had that data available or easily available without like asking them or asking for like, asking them to give you the data. Now you can at least download it, but you still have to like manipulate it and, process it and visualize it, etc. So yeah, you're right.
13,000 rows on Excel or whatever.
Wow.
I'm looking for something, even like something to put on social media to like back up a campaign or something. I'll be like, I'll try to get into that kind of data and be like, I can't analyze this. Eric, help! Yeah.
I could make a point on data too. You're saying like it needs to be aggregated and presented better, but also the data for bikes and pedestrians just doesn't exist, and no amount of aggregation is going to get it to exist. Pittsburgh adopts the Pennsylvania threshold, which adopts the federal threshold, which is if somebody isn't taken away in an ambulance or a car isn't towed, it doesn't get reported. So the data doesn't exist, and no matter how good we do at making it easier, it's going to be underreported.
And that is how it is in practice. But legally, they're supposed to report anything that's an injury. And the ambulance isn't the trigger, it's the injury. But in practice, it's the ambulance.
I want to remind us too, as we're talking about data, all of this is very important. And yes, we need better data, we need better visualization. And what Melissa was really, I think, driving home with us is data doesn't actually change hearts and minds of the public. Typically, they see a number and say, that's a number. And it's stories, though, that are really going to help people connect the dots and hopefully connect the dots with, oh, this is a big problem. We need a solution. The data can help supplement, but the stories need to be the driver.
And I would say that that's the story, right? So that is a story itself. This fact that you don't have the data, but you sure as heck have people that have been harmed on those roads can be a story. And I would say this is maybe where the advocates, Bike Pittsburgh and can help, is that there are states that are doing this better. So which of the states are doing that information and they're sharing it?
So, pause, Melissa. Sam, what do you have to say?
Did.
I know it has been mentioned, and I know that. Sorry, Melissa, you froze again.
Am I back?
Okay.
No,
you're back at the moment, but okay.
Yeah.
It's been mentioned like there is a vulnerable road user safety assessment for the state, but it's really flawed, right? So we have this state document full of data, but the data, like the official report, has serious limitations. Ask Eric, right? But at least it exists, and I think getting familiarized with that is valuable. Just the idea of compiling that data. And then there's other data things that the state has been putting out for years, like the annual crash facts report. And okay, I read those. It's like 68 pages of tables. Also really flawed, right? But there are stories in it. There are stories both about how it's flawed, and there are stories to pull out of it. I don't think you don't even necessarily have to read it every year, but read one of them. And then, there are things to tell and things to tie to individual stories, right? Where everyone's like, oh, a large number of people who are pedestrians, in pedestrian crashes, that someone is drunk. which includes both pedestrians and drivers. And it's like, okay, if you get drunk, you get hit as a pedestrian and you're drunk, isn't it great that you weren't driving? Right? Like,
exactly.
Can we?
Yeah.
Right. But that's one of the like little statistics that gets focused on in the crash facts report, and even gets focused on by professionals. Like they misinterpret it. So I think there are a lot of stories in there. It is a challenge because there's literally mountains of data, right?
There's mountains
And
of data, but you would be on my team to go through that kind of data because it sounds like you've got a brain that can like make sense of it. And this is where, so I want to talk about collaboration a little bit here because here you've got some fantastic talent in these organizations. You have fantastic talent statewide and breaking up like you can't do all this all the time, but you could come up with a project. You could decide, well, which is the most challenging for us right now, which is the most egregious, that's the most least understood and the most could quickly have a plan put into place, get funding or whatever it is. And you can collaborate together to come up with some kind of like pithy storytelling press release that's data wrapped in story. These three people or this one person, this is the story of a state-owned street that's too fast through the through what used to be the outskirts of town, which is now in the middle of town, and tell a story for the media and get them the spoon feed them the information they need and where to get the information they need so that then they can do a broader story.
Great idea. We have 2 minutes left, and I think it would be really neat just to hear any bottom line takeaways or action items. Like if you could distill kind of a crystallized nugget, like a really important learning from today that you're taking home with you, either just that you're going to continue to think about or maybe a specific thing you'd like to act on. Take a moment to reflect on that, and then if you have a thought to share, I would love to hear it, especially from folks we haven't heard from yet in the room. Some of you.
I'll go right now. I'm so brave. I think that for me, as part of the city of Pittsburgh's Vision Zero engagement and whatever else subcommittee, I think getting a communications person in there from the Bureau of Police is important, and that's something that's like currently a gap basically, where we have like some people who do outreach or whatever, but like I feel like a lot of the messaging comes through in a way that we aren't engaging with now and should be.
Brilliant. Resonance from Jacob?
No, I was just sympathizing and agreeing with what Laura said.
Yeah, great. Other crystal nuggets or actions? Excellent.
I've been thinking for a while. So I do like kiddical mass, so like kid family bike rides and the community. And so something I've been thinking about that I saw on like Give Up Bike Club's social media is like they highlight different members of their group and then just talk about them like on a personal level. But I've been thinking about doing like trying to interview people or like get people to just like give like a short little video that ride with their kids and like what are challenges and what are speed bumps for them and like hurdles and like just like a little like blurb about it so that we could turn those stories into something to put out there.
So we got some good actions in the room. We got some storytelling. We got making sure the right people are in the room for Vision Zero. We got integrating this guidance into your style guide. I think each of us probably has some other ideas as well. I know we're at 5 p.m., so we're pretty much wrapped. Melissa, is there anything else you want to say to close us out, or Julie for that matter?
I think that you guys were fantastic. Thank you for being our guinea pigs to do this first very innovative kind of training. I have to just brag and say that the group at Bike Pittsburgh was phenomenal to work with. And so just kudos, terrific. We've been working on this for like 6 months or like off and on, right? So please give them their kudos. And just thank you. Hopefully this can be an ongoing conversation. Oh, actually, I want to throw one final thing out there because it was something that was suggested to me by a journalist at, and I told the team this the other day when I was talking to a reporter in California for the California Report, which is a statewide NPR show. I said, how can we get NPR to start changing their style guides? Do I have to go nationally to somebody? Is it each station by station? Like, what do I do? And he said, well, initially you probably will have to go station by station. I'll see if I can get my boss to talk to you about this. But he said, Melissa, you should be hosting forums with press clubs because they're always trying to have interesting conversations, and dozens of reporters will come to these evenings. And I just want to put it out there that Pennsylvania has two of the oldest press clubs in the country. So, and might be the world. So I just want to throw that out there that anybody who has ties to them and could help Bike Pittsburgh maybe move in that direction someday, next couple of years, that would be a really cool thing to host. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for showing up.
Thank you.
And especially, I do want to recognize the journalists who are here too. I mean, it's really great that you guys are here, and really touches us that you guys are here. And you guys are really doing the work. So thank you.
Thank you.
We need you guys.
We'll be here as long as we can.
Yeah.